Monday, July 21st, 2025, began like any other day in Dhaka. The city awoke to the familiar sounds of rickshaws and distant traffic, the air thick with the promise of another humid summer day. At Milestone School and College in Uttara, students in crisp uniforms streamed through the gates, their faces bright with anticipation for the day ahead. Teachers greeted them with warm smiles, and the school grounds buzzed with the energy of youth and learning. The campus, a place of routine and comfort, stood as a beacon of hope and aspiration for hundreds of families in the neighborhood. Parents waved goodbye, confident their children were safe within these familiar walls. Inside, the day unfolded as usual. Classrooms echoed with lessons and laughter, the corridors alive with chatter and the clatter of shoes on polished floors. Teachers guided their students through the final lessons of the day, while friends made plans for the afternoon. As the afternoon sun dipped lower, golden light spilled across the playground. Students gathered their bags, eager to return home, their minds already drifting to evening meals and family stories. The long shadows stretched across the grounds, marking the end of another ordinary school day. The atmosphere was peaceful, almost serene. Teachers exchanged a few last words, students lingered for a final laugh, and the world outside seemed distant and calm. No one could have imagined that in mere moments, everything would change. Without warning, a thunderous roar shattered the calm. Heads turned skyward as a low-flying military plane appeared, its engines screaming through the air. Confusion rippled through the schoolyard, and a sense of unease began to spread. In a matter of seconds, the unimaginable happened. An explosion erupted near the school, sending shockwaves through the building. Panic swept over students and teachers alike as they scrambled for safety, their faces etched with fear and disbelief. The peaceful sounds of learning were instantly replaced by chaos. Smoke billowed into the sky, flames licked at the edges of the school grounds, and the wail of sirens pierced the air as emergency vehicles rushed to the scene. The once calm campus was now a scene of confusion and terror. In those harrowing moments, lives hung in the balance. Teachers shielded children, parents gathered outside the gates, desperate for news. The world seemed to hold its breath, suspended in the final moments before tragedy fully unfolded. July 21st, 2025 would forever be remembered as a day of profound national grief. A day when an ordinary afternoon was shattered, leaving a scar on the hearts of a nation. Masood Tariq, a dedicated teacher at the local school, was making his way toward the main gate that morning. The sun was just beginning to climb, casting a golden hue over the schoolyard. Masood's mind wandered to the lessons he would teach that day, the laughter of his students, and the simple routines that made up his daily life. He was lost in thought, unaware that everything was about to change in an instant. Suddenly, without any warning, a deafening roar shattered the calm. The sound was so powerful it seemed to come from everywhere at once, echoing off the walls and sending birds scattering from the trees. People nearby froze in shock, their faces turning toward the source of the noise, hearts pounding in their chests. In the next heartbeat, a massive explosion ripped through the air. The ground beneath Masood's feet trembled violently, as if the earth itself was recoiling from the blast. Windows shattered, and the force of the explosion knocked some people to the ground. The peaceful morning was instantly transformed into a scene of chaos and destruction. Masood instinctively looked up, his eyes widening in horror as a gigantic fireball erupted from the heart of the school building. Flames leapt skyward, consuming everything in their path. The heat was intense, even from a distance, and the roar of the fire drowned out all other sounds. Thick black smoke billowed upward, forming a dark column that could be seen for miles. The acrid smell of burning materials filled the air, stinging eyes and throats. It was immediately clear to everyone present that a catastrophe was unfolding before their eyes. In an instant, the world was thrown into chaos. Screams rang out from every direction, children calling for their friends, teachers shouting instructions, parents desperately searching for their loved ones. Confusion and panic swept through the crowd as people tried to make sense of the disaster, some frozen in fear, others running for their lives. Through the thick smoke, Masood could see students stumbling out of the building, their faces streaked with soot, tears streaming down their cheeks. Some clung to each other, while others wandered in shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The sight of children, once full of energy and laughter, now terrified and injured, was almost too much to bear. The school, a place that had always been a sanctuary for learning and growth, was now a raging inferno. Flames devoured classrooms, hallways, and memories. The building's familiar silhouette was quickly disappearing behind a wall of fire and smoke, leaving only devastation in its wake. Instinct took over. Masood, along with other teachers and staff, rushed toward the chaos, determined to help in any way they could. They formed human chains, pulling children and colleagues from the burning building, ignoring the danger to themselves. Every second counted, and the desperate rescue efforts became a race against time. All around, the devastation was total. Books, backpacks, and personal belongings were scattered among the debris, a heartbreaking reminder of the normalcy that had existed just moments before. The ground was littered with fragments of lives interrupted, dreams shattered in an instant. In those harrowing moments, Masood was no longer just a bystander. He became a survivor, thrust into the role of first responder. He comforted the injured, guided the lost, and did everything in his power to bring order to the chaos. The courage and compassion of those who helped would be remembered long after the flames died down. As the smoke continued to rise and the sirens wailed in the distance, Masood realized that the nightmare was far from over. The true impact of the disaster was only beginning to unfold, and the road to recovery would be long and difficult for everyone involved. The crash left the school in ruins, classrooms turned into death traps. Flames and smoke engulfed the building, screams piercing the chaos. Panic swept the grounds, but some ran toward the danger to help. Teachers and students pulled friends from the wreckage, braving heat and smoke. Local residents rushed in, forming impromptu rescue teams. Every second counted as they fought to save lives. Amidst the horror, acts of courage shone through. The community became the first line of response before help arrived. Sirens wailed as fire trucks, ambulances, and police arrived. Firefighters faced a raging inferno, battling flames fueled by jet fuel. Paramedics set up triage, treating burns and traumatic injuries. The building's collapse threatened rescuers at every turn. Soldiers and firefighters navigated debris, searching for survivors. Hospitals across Dhaka prepared for mass casualties. Roads clogged with emergency vehicles and frantic parents. Coordination was intense, but even seasoned professionals were shaken. The school had become a tomb for the young. As the flames were finally subdued and the last embers faded, a haunting silence settled over the crash site. In that stillness, the true scale of the tragedy began to reveal itself. The devastation was not just in the twisted metal and scorched earth, but in the lives that had been so suddenly and violently altered. 19 precious lives were lost that day, 16 students, 2 dedicated teachers, and the pilot who had been at the controls. Each name on the growing list of casualties was a person with dreams, families, and futures that would never be realized. The community was left reeling, struggling to comprehend the enormity of the loss. Behind every number was a story, a child's laughter silenced, a parent's hopes dashed, a teacher's guidance lost forever. The grief rippled outward, touching not just immediate families, but friends, neighbors, and the entire town. The pain was raw and overwhelming, as families clung to each other, seeking comfort in shared sorrow. More than 100 others were injured, many suffering from severe burns and traumatic wounds. Hospitals across the region were pushed to their limits, as doctors and nurses worked tirelessly to save lives and ease suffering. Waiting rooms overflowed with anxious families, desperate for news of their loved ones. The air was thick with fear and uncertainty, as every phone call or approaching doctor could bring either relief or heartbreak. 8 victims remained in critical condition, their lives hanging in the balance. In intensive care units, families kept vigil at bedsides, whispering prayers and holding on to hope as medical teams fought to keep them alive. In the chaos and confusion, parents and relatives searched desperately through hospital corridors, scanning lists of survivors, clinging to any shred of hope that their loved ones might be among the living. For 19 families, that hope was cruelly extinguished. Their worst fears were realized, and the weight of their loss was almost too much to bear. The community rallied around them, offering support, But the heartbreak was profound and enduring. The school, once filled with laughter and life, became a place of mourning. Hallways echoed with silence, classrooms sat empty, and makeshift memorials grew outside the building as students, teachers, and neighbors gathered to remember those who were lost. The human cost of the tragedy was laid bare for all to see, etched in the names on memorial walls, in the faces of mourners, and in the quiet resolve of a community determined to honor the memories of those they lost. The tragedy sent shockwaves across Bangladesh and beyond. Interim Prime Minister Muhammad Yunus addressed the nation, expressing deep condolences. He declared a national day of mourning and ordered flags at half-mast. Yunus promised a full, independent investigation into the crash. He pledged government support for victims' families and covered all medical expenses. The Prime Minister vowed to prevent such a disaster from ever happening again. His words marked the beginning of national healing, the country united in grief and a demand for answers. The numbers cannot capture the true human toll. Families of the lost face a future forever changed. Survivors are haunted by trauma, struggling with fear and guilt. The school, once a haven, is now a source of pain. The wider community's sense of security is shattered. Parents question the safety of schools and military flight paths. The tragedy has forced difficult conversations about safety and trust. Healing will be a long, arduous journey for all. In tragedy, the Uttara community showed unity and resilience. Vigils and memorials transformed the school grounds into a place of remembrance. Neighbors and businesses rallied to support affected families. Volunteers donated blood and raised funds for the injured. Students organized their own tributes, sharing memories and hope. The community's compassion became a beacon in the darkness. Grief forged new bonds and strengthened resolve. Together, they began the long path to healing. As recovery began, the nation demanded justice, remembrance, and healing. The investigation into the crash became a moral imperative. Accountability was essential. Flight paths and safety protocols must change. The government's response would be closely watched. Remembrance was vital. The victims' names and stories must endure. A permanent memorial would honor their memory and teach future generations. Healing required long-term support for survivors and families. Rebuilding the school meant restoring safety and hope. The tragedy of July 21, 2025 would never be forgotten. Through justice and unity, Bangladesh could find a way forward.